audience, friends and colleagues. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second session of the Day 2 of Vienna Migration Conference 2023. My name is Marija Raus and I serve as a head of region Silk Routes ad interim with ICMPD. And I will be moderating this session, focusing on the people on the move, protecting lives and managing borders. I wish to extend a special thanks and a special welcome to our guests today, Mr. Vincent Cochetel, who is a special envoy of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees for the Central Mediterranean situation, worked with UNHCR for several decades in many regions of the world and comes with a lot of insight and knowledge on the topic that we will be discussing in the next hour. And Mr. Jonas Grimheden, head of the Frontex Fundamental Rights Office, pioneering an important work of integrating fundamental rights into the work of the European Border and Coast Guard Agency. And anyone who has done something similar in the past, I'm sure, knows how challenging it is to integrate fundamental and human rights into the institutions. To introduce the topic briefly, in this panel we will be discussing three things: how to ensure higher standards of safe migration for people on the move, how to address policy frictions that arise between securing borders and protecting human rights, as well as with whom do we forge partnerships in this endeavor. And we will be doing so by reflecting on three statements that we have phrased as three uncomfortable truths, three key policy dilemmas that countries, stakeholders, and people on the move face. Before giving the word to our first speaker, I wish to introduce uncomfortable truth number one, the statement number one, and also to invite audience in the room and as well as audience that is following us online via a Vhova app to reflect with us jointly on the uncomfortable truth number one, to participate in the poll and to tell us whether you agree, whether you disagree, or whether you still do not have a formed opinion on it. So we begin. Uncomfortable truth number one says that there are no good policy solutions that ensure the right balance between secure borders and commitment to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights for people on the move. We are waiting for your replies and for the poll results before we continue. Do we have some overview already? Okay. So, the audience disagrees. The audience believes that there are good policy solutions that ensure the right balance between the two. Mr. Cochetel, I turn to you first for the first reflection. And to paint the picture, we know that available resettlement options for those in need are very scarce, not sufficient. We also know that complementary pathways are in their early stage of development, still not there to support the needs and to respond to the needs. Does this not automatically translate into the tensions along migratory routes and to this potential uncomfortable truth? And how, from your perspective, can we do better to bring ensuring effective human rights protections and secure borders together?
Thank you. That's a difficult question. Well, I'll start with that inconvenient truth or uncomfortable truth, or I should say maybe convenient lie. We heard it yesterday. It's a nice talking point. We'll have more legal pathways for refugees and for migrants, and we will have less irregular movement. Well, that's not true. That's a lie. It's easy to try to convince people, But it does not work that way. People move for different reasons, along different routes, and you don't solve one by the other. You need the legal pathways for refugees, for migrants, but it won't solve the problem of irregular arrival. For that, you need return, and you can only have return if you have cooperation, and you can only have return if you have good screening that ensure that those who need protection for one reason or another are identified and as quickly as possible. So the tensions are there, but we need to work on all fronts. On the legal pathways, as I said, as you said, they're very limited. 58,000 refugees resettled last year all around the world. 58,000, there's never been so low. Complementary pathways less than 1,000 for refugees. Legal migration starting here and there, but far insufficient. And I really have a problem with the fact that we should use those legal pathways, in my view, much more for women. It has to become a gender corrector. Most of the irregular movement around the world involve men, and this is just not fair. So hopefully the legal pathways for refugees and migrants can correct a bit this. On the screening, it's not easy, and I'm not sure, well, I think the pact in Europe will address the issue of screening. We'll have better capacity at borders to operate that screening. I'm not sure the pact addressed the question of return, because the return issue comes with dialogue, with engagement, and with multifaceted solution, but it's possible. We have no other choice.
Thank you very much. So putting all of the solutions in the same box, in your view, does not work and has to be addressed one by one, not mixing irregular arrivals with complementary pathways, but developing them alternatively and addressing irregular arrivals differently. But also thank you for renaming our uncomfortable truth to a convenient lie. Mr. Grimheden, there are opinions according to which the number of irregular arrivals to Europe is as it is because there is a belief that, and there is also a very good human rights record and reputation of the European continent. But then what are the people met with at European borders? Frontex has been very active in recent years in ensuring that fundamental rights are integrated in the common core curriculum for EU border guards. You are working intensively on building the EU border guard culture. So it would be interesting to hear from you what place protection of fundamental rights has in the overall concept of the EU border guard culture, and can we, or better said, how can we have secure borders with full respect of human rights and the people of the move?
Thank you very much. I was also pleased to see the results of the poll here. It speaks in favor of the audience. I also voted, and I voted for the majority, full transparency. To me, it's rather the opposite. I think to have border management that is not in compliance with fundamental rights is counterproductive in many ways. So I think it's clear from me, and I think for Frontex as a whole, that border management has to be not only in compliance with the minimum standards, but be higher and higher professional standards in order to lead and guide as role model in Europe and maybe beyond. So that's my starting point and my ambition, and I believe also the ambition of the agency as a whole. So what does that mean in practice? Well, if border management is done compromising fundamental rights, you don't have the trust in the people, in the city, in the country that you're operating, but you also don't have the trust from the people that you are managing, the people on the move. So you need to deliver in a professional and fundamental rights, human rights compliant way in order to have that trust. Border management also has a lot to do with the law enforcement, and as we know, in all law enforcement contexts, you need the trust of the people to have information, to have impact, to be able to act in a professional way. So for me, again, happy to see the results. I would have hoped in an audience like that we would have been way over 90%, but 67 is okay.
Well, maybe some don't talk from the perspective of their belief and a wish to see these practices, but maybe out of negative experiences where they've seen this friction arise more often than not. But what are the biggest obstacles in achieving this ideal human rights compliant border governance?
Thanks, Marija. You spoke about the culture in your first question there, and I think, of course, that's you need a culture shift if you have started on the wrong side of things. Culture comes with training, capacity building in various ways, actions, programs, all of that very important, and the agency and the European Border and Coast Guard as a whole has all this in place, improving, and the work that I do contribute to this, I hope. There's also a strategy, the European Integrated Border Management Strategy recently adopted with a number of actions that relates to fundamental rights in various detailed ways. All that is crucial. But with that only, we will not get very far, I'm afraid. What we need is to take the procedures that are in place, analyze them, to check that they're in compliance with human rights standards and EU law. We need to make sure that we learn from mistakes that we have identified and integrate them in the procedures. So the standard operating procedures should not be some wishy-washy, airy-fairy stuff at the very high abstraction level, but be very, very concrete. Concrete to the level of this happened, this cannot happen again. So when we identify once or maybe 5 times that something has gone wrong, it should go into the standard operating procedures to ensure that this does not happen again. So explicitly excluding this is not allowed. And I'm not talking about very advanced legal analysis. I'm talking about, unfortunately, very, very concrete things. You cannot beat migrants. You cannot steal their phones, their clothes, their shoes. You cannot send them back without any processing, screening. So it's not rocket science, but very, very concrete work that we need to do. In Frontex and at the member states, and maybe I can underscore that for Frontex, it's very easy for me to influence. At the member states level, it's the opposite.
Thank you very much. And I think you have touched upon some elements of what comes under the uncomfortable truth number 2, which I see as an elephant in the session, not in the room, but definitely in this session. And again, I would like to invite our audience in the room and following us online to give us their views and to share their reflection with us on the uncomfortable truth number 2, dealing with pushbacks, and saying that pushbacks are a byproduct of migration and asylum policies whose practical implementation fails on human rights commitments. We need you to tell us whether you agree with the statement, you don't agree with it, or you still don't have a formed opinion. So the majority seems to agree that it is not the failure of the policies, but the failure of their practical implementation. So, Mr. Grimheden, again to you. First, how do you vote? And second, how is the fundamental rights strategy of Frontex that you've just mentioned addressing the challenging topic of pushbacks? What are your thoughts on additional measures that need to be put in place to have them prohibited, not only in policy but also in practice?
Thank you. So I voted again for the majority, and it's interesting to see that the I agree in this case is similar in proportion to the previous vote. So maybe the same people. I think I mentioned already the standard operating procedures, that these need to be much more concrete, much more European, much more harmonized across EU member states to ensure that we explicitly prohibit certain practices. It cannot be left to ambiguity, to gray zones, to have things that are clearly criminal left vague. We don't have to wait until we are able to nuance the level of regulation to that level. We can start with the problems and then go higher in abstraction level if we want to address the problems. Of course, that's not a possibility to simply impose for Frontex. That would be ideal, in my view, but not possible. Frontex doesn't have that role. We clearly have member states. We have shared borders since 30 years, European Union borders, but we don't have a shared what should I say, a sovereign that can impose these kinds of detailed rules. We still have sovereign states. So what could we do? Well, from my perspective, we monitor a lot. So we are at the EU's external borders in third countries. We're at air, land, and sea. We're on return flights, monitoring that forced return flights are done properly. We fly all the way to the destination and back, of course. We gather all this information and push where we can in Frontex with the management board, and in the management board we have representatives from all the border and coast guard operations in the European Union and Schengen associated countries. So it's quite a good audience when I raise these issues there. We also have the European Commission and we have observers from other entities in the European Union. We also have civil society represented there. We have UNHCR represented there and other important actors. And that forum is a good way, but of course, again, it's a soft, slow way. So more concretely, the monitoring I mentioned, we spent already this year more than 1,000 days in the field in 20-something countries. So of course, we have a very good comparative overview of what happens, what doesn't happen, what works, what doesn't work. And these practices that we see, we are reporting on, sharing, and trying to push again for that these practices come to the fore, are known and understood, and how to deal with them. And I think, maybe to close on this question, I think it's very often or very rare that anyone is doing this on purpose. I think there are a number of factors that forces actors to do this in the way that they have to do. So we also have to think creatively, what are the factors, what are the actions that needs to be put in place to ensure that this is not a consequence of bad policy or of insufficient resources or of poorly trained staff. So there has to be a system in place, and here I think the European Union could do a lot more to ensure that the system ensures, not only prohibits, but also enables the right action.
Thank you very much. I would turn to Mr. Cochetel now to ask your views. UNHCR has been rather vocal, condemning the increasing violations of human rights at European borders. Do you see anything changes? Are you in position to influence European countries to change the deplorable practices as they were described based on your policy advice? What kind of policy advice do you give to them? And how is it moving ahead? Where is the challenge from your perspective?
Okay, thank you. Well, whether the situation improved depends where. And I have to say it's not just a European problem. I mean, we are critical of some practices at European border, but it's not just Europe. I'm based in Tunisia, and we have challenges with the borders, and not just the maritime border, but the land border, the airport border. So there are challenges. Now, first, I'd like to start by acknowledging the difficult job of border guards everywhere. It's not an easy job. You have a few minutes to decide in a rather uncomfortable environment, and unfortunately, mistakes are possible. It's the human factor. I remember, I'll share with you that anecdote, because for me, that's quite a defining moment for me. It was in Samos in 2014, so small island in Greece. Boats were coming early in the morning, 6:30. a boat full of Syrians arrives, people were very silent on the boat, and I asked one interpreter, that's fine, you're safe here, you know, and people looked at me silently, and I tried to figure out what happened, and so I took aside part of the people on the boat, some families. I said, what's the problem? There was a shipwreck, some people lost their life in the Aegean Sea. He said, no, you don't understand. I said, no, I don't understand. He said, well, we are on the boat with the very same people we flee from. That means you have to have the ability at the border, almost at the border, to distinguish those who need the protection and those we need to protect ourselves against. And that's not easy. And it's not just for border guards, of course, because border guards would have some expertise, but limited expertise. It's a multidisciplinary approach, it's difficult. So hopefully the pact will solve the aspect of the screening with the EU Asylum Agency, the combined force of Europol, Eurojust, Frontex. But that's not enough. I mean, again, you need a quick procedure for manifestly unfunded application that translates into quick return. Otherwise, the system cannot work. And again, that's not in Europe. That's the same problem with return at border in other parts of the world. So what we've learned, I think, working closely with Frontex is, when mistakes are made, and as I said, they can happen, there should be no tolerance for those mistakes. There should be no concealing of those mistakes. With social media, now it's known. People have their mobile phone, you will hear about it, so there's no point denying. What is important is to file those incident reports, investigate what happened. Is that a training issue? Is that an attitude issue? Is that something illegal? Is that bad guidance, bad communication? And feed those lessons learned into training, into monitoring, into supervision. I mean, there is no easy quick fix. It's a lot of work, a lot of labor. But again, we need to concentrate on the most critical border. And sometimes what meets the eyes is not exactly what's happening. Another anecdote, and I finish with that. In September 89, long time ago, before the fall of the Berlin Wall, I was part of a small UNHCR mission. We were two. We had to go to at that time, the Communist Republic of Hungary. And the Hungarian authorities took us to the border with, at that time, Czechoslovakia, and asked us what should we do with those East German tourists coming by hundreds and then thousands. They had a lot of luggage. Was it instrumentalization? Was it genuine advice they were seeking for us as how you manage those flows that are a bit unusual? So again, we need to take the time to reflect, to discuss, and to reach compromise on solutions that protect the citizens of our country and at the same time protect people that have protection needs.
Indeed, compromise and solutions are the constructive way forward, and also very important to do what is possible not to build a culture of impunity in the cases where mistakes do happen. But I hear from both of you that there are serious efforts going in this direction. So this way, talking about compromise and solutions, it may be a time to move to the uncomfortable truth number 3, which is about forging partnerships, and another opportunity for our audience to share views with us and help us make the discussion better informed. We want to hear from you. So please participate in the poll via Vhova app. The uncomfortable truth number 3 states that international cooperation on migration requires working with counterparts who don't always share the same values.
I think
yes.
even lawyers can handle list cancer statistics.
Yes, Mr. Cochetel, international cooperation, forging partnerships and cooperation with all the different kinds of stakeholders is actually one of the strategies that is being employed in order to increase compliance, advocate for better protection of human rights, also of the people on the move. So is there an alternative to forging partnerships? I think audience is with us on this one. What do we do when our partners do not assign to the same values as we, and when they don't assign the same importance to upholding human rights principles and standards?
Okay, but yeah, first of all, for me, there should be no precondition to dialogue. We need to dialogue with everyone. I mean, I represent a humanitarian organization. There are humanitarian imperatives. We are talking to all sorts of governments around the world. And we have to do it because that's the way solutions are found, through dialogue. So sometimes, yes, you have the perception people don't have the same value, but you have to spend the time, like Vice President Jonas said yesterday, you have to spend the time to listen and try to build some common ground and find some common interest, and you will find common interest. It's just a matter of time, and it's a matter of packaging, and not just put your priority first and impose them onto others. That's why sometimes I'm a bit surprised politicians in Europe, but also in Africa, don't refer anymore to the Valletta Plan of Action. For me, it was a good compact with 5 pillars. It was balanced. It was negotiated text, and all the states could find some interest in implementing, not sequentially, but at the same time, the 5 different pillars. You should not expect the other to move first before you concede something. The implementation had to happen at all levels at the same time. Unfortunately, it was short-lived. There's no more financial instrument to support the implementation, and it's no longer a framework of reference for any country. But I think we have to return to those packages that are balanced and which are building on common interest to state to cooperate, rather than to reinvent new action plan, new strategies. We don't have a shortage of strategies and action plans. Let's stick to one and let's implement.
Indeed, but do you find yourself in a difficult position having to explain why some of the countries you cooperate with fail on human rights commitments?
Yeah, no, it's difficult. With some countries, it's even more and more difficult. It has never been so difficult to talk about asylum on some basic values. But there again, you have to use the history. Nobody knows what's happening tomorrow. You have to use the history. Some recent crises have shown us that, a neighboring country could be affected by a war. And when it's in the close neighborhood, it's changed the dimension. And we could see in Europe that capital of solidarity when the Ukrainian refugee came. And that translated at communal level, at citizens level, at state level. I think we need that, and we see that on other continents for people affected by war and human rights conflict. So I believe in the capital of empathy in the world. We need to build on that and on dialogue, and not impose ready-made solutions. Solutions have to be crafted by all the parties.
Thank you very much. Mr. Grimheden, the initiative that you're pioneering within Frontex is, let's say, young. Let's call it young. While you're pioneering it, you see that the agency is forced with the same challenge. There was a mention of balance, there was a mention of dialogue, of crafting solutions together, but for you it may be a bit more difficult to balance between the mandate to support member states in managing the EU external borders and human rights or fundamental rights element. Are there any red lines? Is there a need to develop red lines in this endeavor, or should there be a continuity of engagement until we come to the point of full compliance? How do you see this challenge, and how should it be best approached from the perspective of the work that you are doing?
Thank you very much. Maybe first of all, just agree to the wisdoms of Vincent that I agree fully with. I think also it's important to think about values, that's a possible challenge, sort of diverging values. But again, stressing what I said before, the capacity to actually do right. They might have the values, but not the capacity to do right. So, important distinction, I think. For me, in my work, monitoring and advising on fundamental rights, human rights, in the EU, outside of the EU, for sure, if I would only talk to the converted, I would do the wrong thing. So, of course, I have to engage, and I spend by far the most time on the most difficult countries, for sure. So, of course, I have to engage in my job, and I think the agency, an agency like the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, has to engage also with the difficult countries. Not naively, not in the same way, not one model that fits all, but strategically. We have to do what I like to think of as sequencing. Put simply, we shouldn't offer someone a really expensive boat without the procedures that I talked about before. First, we have fundamental rights, human rights proof procedures. Then you get the boat. That ensures that the boat acts in the right way, but also that we do get the procedures, because if we give the boat first, many will not want those procedures, right? So this sequencing is important. Equally important, I think, is mitigating measures. And if we talk about, in particular, more exotic countries from a European perspective, mitigating measures would have to be stronger. That could be, in my view, something very effective is to ensure that the national authorities, have capacity to monitor independently themselves. So we can do, from a Frontex perspective, only so far, Frontex and then some, but what we need is also a national capacity to monitor on the ground. That could be a national human rights institution, an ombuds institution, like some that are represented here. But ensuring that capacity and that awareness is there, and not simply a brass plate on some door, but a genuine capacity to monitor the borders. And also, of course, sequencing in the sense of capacity building, awareness, starting at that end, and not go for boots on the ground or eyes in the sky right away. We have to ensure that there is trust, that we can trust each other before proceeding with the expensive gear and possibly very intrusive technology. Thank you.
I would have a follow-up question in this respect, and that is how prepared national human rights institutions of countries you work with are to engage on this particular matter.
Thanks. So of course it depends on, right? We have countries where the border issues are very limited, where they probably have some capacity to do what is reasonable, to do spot checks. We have some countries, Greece, Italy, Spain, where the border exposure is very, very intense, Lithuania, Poland, etc., where I would think that the NHRIs, national human rights institutions, ombuds institutions, does not have enough capacity. Coming back to the number I gave before, this year we spent 1,000 days in the field, covering 20 countries maybe. I don't know, but I would think that very few of these national monitoring mechanisms have spent more than a couple of weeks in a year, which is not enough, right? And I think a couple of weeks is maybe optimistic. I think in Croatia that happens, and maybe some other countries, but not many. If we then talk about countries that are outside of the European Union, where we're also involved, making assessments, due diligence, advising the agency on what steps could be taken, what kind of scenarios could we envisage, what are the mitigating measures. Of course, I would think that the capacity there is even more limited.
Thank you very much. We are very good on time, very on the point comments, so thank you for this. Before we turn to the questions of the audience, I wish to say that we are very pleased that we have started the discussions on human rights and people on the move, and we hope to continue the discussion in continuity also next year. And in this sense, we would like to maybe set some targets and to define maybe several most important things that we should keep our eyes on when working on bringing together border security and protection of human rights. So I would like to invite the audience again for the final time in this session to take part in the poll and to tell us one thing that they would like to see change for improving human rights border practices at international borders in the year to follow. And I would also want to ask a reflection from you. What would be, it doesn't have to be from the audience, we would maybe like to have it a bit more brief so that we can compile the replies. But from you, what would you see as a priority matter to be addressed? One thing that you would like to see change, Mr. Cochetel?
Well, I'll talk about one uncomfortable debate we have everywhere. It's for me those tragedies in the Mediterranean Sea. I've heard so many politicians saying never again. What do I tell my children? What do you tell your children? We can't avoid that. We have a fire in this building and we should look at nationality, color of the skin, or to save some, not save others. No, I think we should not lose our values. You know, some people would be too happy if Europe would lose its values. Let's not lose our values. They are fundamental consideration of humanity. You rescue, you save, and you sort out. Like we do at airport procedure, you sort out when people are disembarked. We need to be better at those procedures. But it's not also that some countries have more responsibility than others. It has to be on both sides of the Mediterranean Sea. And, you know, commercial ship, it's the same. I mean, private actors have human rights responsibility. I see in the Mediterranean Sea, when there is a distress situation, many boats are switching off their signal. They don't want to rescue. Well, it's abnormal. The sea does not belong to anyone. So let's return to the fundamental, let's save life, and then let's sort out who is entitled to what, and let's work with the Mediterranean partner on the other side. It also affects their citizens. I'm sure we can find some common ground. So let's solve that. I'm not saying we will save all the life. The sea is big. Those boats are unseaworthy for many of them, so there will be other tragedy, but there are many that could have been avoided, like the one in Pylos in Greece.
So can I summarize it as you rescue? That everyone should...
Well, Mediterranean rescue, share responsibility, a shared sea, a collective responsibility to sort that out.
Thank you very much. Mr. Grimheden, the same question for you.
Thank you. Looking at the many good answers here, I struggle a little bit by pinpointing what is needed. I have many ideas in my head, but I think maybe sounding more abstract than I would like to, but I think evidence-based knowledge, evidence-based decision is key. Also thinking of what Vincent was saying, we shouldn't fool ourselves that there are push factors or pull factors just because the politician says so. We should take these decisions on a solid evidential ground to know that this is actually impacting the flow. If we think that brutality and violence at the borders could scare off migrants, I would think that's easy to refute, easy to disprove. But if that is a perpetuating understanding among politicians or actors, we clearly have a problem. So coming back then to what I proposed, really knowing what we say. So the decisions that are taken should be based on clear scientific evidence.
Smart decisions, then.
Well formulated.
Yes, thank you very much. Can we please add smart decisions and the rescue element in the word cloud? I think at this point we can move to the questions from the audience. So the first, of course, goes to the audience in the room. Would there be any questions? Yes, please, the back of the room. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks very much for this really interesting and very important session. My name is Megan Hendo. I'm from the research unit of ICMPD, and I am reflecting on the session, and I think it's really important to think about fundamental rights treatment on the blue and the green borders. I think it's important to put this at the fore. But I wonder also what your thinking is in terms of integrating fundamental rights approaches in these new technologies that we're seeing being implemented at the border. A lot of the recent policy development in this area has been on interoperability frameworks, on building and developing and implementing new types of databases and collecting this data across the European space. So I just wanted to ask for your reflections or ideas about how best to ensure fundamental rights approaches in this new, let's say, network of interoperability.
Who wishes to take the question? Mr. Grimheden, yes, please.
Thanks a lot for bringing us to that important area. I think for me, I discussed actually with one of the participants from Bosch Foundation yesterday. Similar thoughts, similar question. And to me, it's important that technology is used. For me, technology is something positive. Yes, there are lots of risks, lots of dangers, data protection, privacy intrusion, information and data used for the wrong purposes. So we also there have to be smart, to use your phrase there, Marija. We have to be smart in the sense that we cannot just give away technology that can be used in the wrong way. Also there we have to make sure that there are procedures in place that guarantees that this technology is not used in the wrong way. Even more, ideally, we could have technology that could ensure that we do better on fundamental rights, on human rights. So in my experience, that's something we are pushing for. How can we ensure that it's not only fundamental rights, human rights proof, but actually human rights enabling, or even there's technology that could be helpful in simply being useful for its sole purpose, to be useful for human rights, fundamental rights. So I suppose too abstract an answer, but at least a starting point. And Vincent will add, I hope.
Well, no, I mean, principle of necessity, principle of proportionality when it gets to collection of data. But if it's to better protect people and if it's to better protect society, I don't see objection. We need to make sure, as you said, technology is not misused, but there are sometimes opposition upfront to data collection, which I don't understand anymore, frankly speaking. In the field of combating, for instance, human trafficking, I know in Europe we have a lot of restriction to share data with third parties. Well, if you don't share with third parties, you won't address the transnational nature of that crime. That will not work. That will remain a nice political point. We need to defeat the business model of the human trafficker. Well, for that you have to share actionable intelligence, otherwise it does not work. So I'm not too concerned about sharing data. You need to monitor, you need to be careful, but we need to share more data than less if we want to be more effective.
If I can add to this question, I don't think there is any contesting opinion on the need to share data, in particular in the types of crimes that you have just explained, and it's also a migration management issue that has a lot to do with the actions of the law enforcement. But when all of these technologies and systems are being envisioned, is enough attention paid to also safeguards so that they don't end up being used for different purposes?
Well, that's what we need to make sure. I mean, when you talk about asylum, refugee protection, yes, the data cannot be shared with the country of origin, cannot be shared with countries that could be in endanger the life maybe of the family that remains in another country. So we need to be very careful. There are ways to monitor that. I think they need to be further developed as we are using more technology to communicate. But again, data protection should be an enabler for more human rights monitoring, but it should not be an obstacle to sharing less information that can bring objectively dividends in terms of protection to the people concerned and to the societies that need to be protected.
Thank you. I will select now one question from the online audience while still allowing the time for... yes, please. Okay, Mr. Henrik.
Yes, hello. Yep. Thank you so much to both of you. I've known you for many years, and it's a pleasure to listen to all the experiences that you hold. I have one little issue. It's the word pushback. It was all over the screen. It's been in the media for the past many years. It's being used by everybody, journalists, experts. Basically, it's a non-legal term. It's never been defined. You don't find it in any legal instruments, and it confuses discussions the way I see it, because we don't really know what we're talking about. Is it a breach of human rights? Is it a breach of the Refugee Convention? Is it a breach of prohibition against group expulsions? What are we talking about? I think we need to be more precise, because this is a very, very, very crucial, fine line to draw between what is border protection and what is breach of law. So could you maybe make a few comments on that? I even mentioned it to you, Jonas, when we were in Frontex 6 months ago with the Danish Parliament, and I think your answer then was very clever, and maybe you can share that with all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, and nice to have an answer referred to as clever, so I can repeat what I said if I remember. So we try to use, to acknowledge first, pushback is very attractive, right? It's catchy, it's a nice headline in any media outlet, but we try to use a term that is, or terms that are more legal, or actually legal. So we use collective expulsion, we use non-refoulement, we use deprivation of liberty, torture, unfortunately, in inhuman and degrading treatment on occasion. And then sometimes, for shorthand, we sort of say this is sometimes perceived as pushback. Everything that is done at the borders is, of course, not a pushback. There's certainly a legal gray zone where we need to clarify, I think, from a legal perspective, what is allowed and what is not. But I agree with you that pushback is a risky term because of this vagueness. So if we can avoid it and use more concrete, specific terms, I think it's adding clarity and brings us to an answer and a solution. Thank you.
Mr. Cochetel, anything to add?
I fully agree. I think we can add to the list of terms non-admission, which can be arbitrary or lawful, non-admission at border. I think we try to avoid using the word pushback also, because it does not translate in legal systems, so we should try to be as precise as possible. But as you say, the media love that one.
But you will agree that there were other phenomena in the past that did not have their legal definition, and that it took some time for legal definitions to be adopted, yes, yet phenomena were there. So if we agree that there is a phenomenon of pushback that legally can constitute different already existing definitions, maybe we can justify the use of term today from that perspective. It is a phenomenon that is being discussed, met, and that is just present in every discussion that relates to human rights at international borders. So we have approached it from that perspective as an emerging phenomenon that at one point in time may become also a legal term. We don't know that yet. I wanted to say, yes, please, this is so good to see so many hands in the air. But please present yourself.
Yeah, I'm Mark Speak from the Federal Department for Justice and Police in Switzerland. Thank you very much for the interesting points and the important discussion we already had. We've been talking a lot about the situation in the Mediterranean, and this is, of course, has been very much in the focus. I would like to draw also the attention to the other big issue, the Belarus border. We have been talking about this earlier, where we see like a mixture of a threat to national security by the presence of Wagner agents, of Russian agents in Belarus, the phenomenon of instrumentalization of migrants, and on the other hand, also legitimate applications for international protections. And my question would be, how can you make yourself heard in such a situation where you have a mixture of different threats and challenges which are not easy to differentiate and to sort out? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, Mr. Cochetel, you've already introduced a bit of this in your response to the first question, that it cannot all be grouped together and that the challenge is to distinguish the screening, also big pressures and capacities of those working on borders to do everything in a fully compliant way, and that there has to be understanding of this challenge. But would you like to complement further to...
Well, a bit what we said before, evidence-based decision, research, anticipation, early warning, having intelligence about the routes, about the means of transportation, about the networks behind that, about the political use or planned use of some of the movement. So we need more intelligence in general to better prepare for the response, which can be admission, or which can be or could have been, in the case of Belarus, a robust political response on engagement with the countries that were involved in the facilitation of those movements. But it's not easy because we are forced to communicate quickly on something that is happening before our eyes, sometimes without having the depth in terms of analysis of the situation on the dynamics behind. But there are a couple of situations looming in our neighborhood. I'm talking about the neighborhood of Europe, which are in the making. So it's for us to already think about the response, engage the country in the neighborhood, and try to avert those movements and making sure that there is a dignified solutions for the people that are instrumentalized in those movements. Not an easy answer, I'm sorry. I'm not a politician.
We have two more hands raised in this side of the room and two more in this side, but I saw that one first. Maybe the microphone can go. That's fine as well. I thought the colleague behind, but that's fine. Yours will be next. That's okay.
Thank you very much and good morning. My name is Niels Coleman. I'm from the Ministry of Justice and Security in The Hague. I have a question to Vincent Cochetel. I think you rightfully pointed to the necessity of indiscriminate SAR operations in the Mediterranean and also to the need for cooperation with other countries in the Mediterranean basin. UNHCR has been thinking about adding to the discussion on possible new solutions of migration management with a concept you call the routes-based approach. I think there's also some new thinking going on your part as to how there might be more cooperation in the Mediterranean region with different countries on disembarkation. I was wondering if you could share some more details of the thinking behind those new concepts with the audience. Thank you.
As I said, we are witnessing mixed movement. That means people move for different reasons. It's a mix of primary and secondary movement. So we need, again, the evidence. We need that differentiating those movements. I was happy to see that Vice President Jonas went to Ivory Coast and on Guinea recently, because these are the number 2 top nationality in terms of arrival to Italy for quite some time. You know, could have gone there before to try to find out a bit why those nationals are leaving, when we believe, in particular in the context of Ivory Coast, that there is no more political problem that justify the granting of refugee status in Ivory Coast. But we still have a 28% recognition rate in Europe. We have a return rate, I think, for Ivorians of 3.7. So most of the Ivorians coming to Europe stay for one reason or the other, but most of them are not recognized refugees. So you need to engage with the country of origin. That's part of the route-based approach when it relates to migrants. When it comes to refugees, well, you need to stabilize where you can. You need to stabilize, focusing on the population the most likely to move, which are the youth. And where can you do that today? Well, it's quite difficult. But one country that comes to my mind, to our mind as a priority, is Chad. Nobody talks about Chad. Chad has received 350,000 refugees from Sudan since the 15th of April. 350,000, which comes at the top of other refugees that was on its territory. Chad is one country away from Europe. Like Turkey was one country away from Syria in 2015 and is still one country away from Syria. So let's keep in mind geography, because we're not going to change it. So do we want to see Sudanese on the move? Because where do they move? They move to Libya. After Libya, they go to Tunisia. Some of them will go to Europe. Do we invest in protection? Do we invest in development? Do we invest in livelihood for this youth that is not occupied in the refugee camp? Providing emergency response, it's not difficult. Requires money. We don't have enough, but it's not difficult. But what do you do to occupy the people? You don't occupy them, they will move. Mauritania is another example with Malians. We have a deterioration of the situation in Mali. Timbuktu today is besieged by the Al-Qaeda franchise in the Sahel. We've seen movement going to Algeria. We see movement going to Mauritania. Let's stabilize where we can, providing assistance, response, legal pathways also for some in those countries. If we don't create hope, if we don't enable people to live dignified life, we should not be surprised they move. But they move in all directions. You know, in our psyche, they all move to Europe. No. Vast majority, they are too poor, they stay very close to home, they don't come to Europe. But I think we all have an interest in stabilizing those situations and identifying the programmatic activities that can make a difference. If we don't invest, well, we will have to live with the consequence. That's as simple as that.
Thank you very much. Is my microphone not working? Working now. I have to apologize to everyone in the room because our time for this session is done. What we can do is make an effort to collect your questions and share with our distinguished guests today, and also to provide an opportunity to maybe exchange on your questions during the coffee break. I want to thank Mr. Cochetel, Mr. Grimheden for unpacking this challenging topic with us today. The most important conclusion for us is that there are and there can be policies that put two things together. We have discussed uncomfortable truths in a genuine and constructive manner and environment. And I'm certain that the insight that you have shared with us will be considered and integrated into the future policy building on the matter in Europe and further. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well done. Thank you.